Hi, welcome to the Crubcast. I'm Chris. Today with me is Nico and Moriarty. Say hello, gentlemen.
Yes, hello. And today we're going to be talking about game preservation, which is always, I think, something that's fun to talk about. It's interesting, and I think it really kind of affects us as gamers because, preservation, we're going to talk about what it means and what some of the problems are with it, including the legal problems, which are a big part of it. We're going to talk a little bit maybe about emulation, MMOs, physical, digital, definitive versions, remasters, piracy, whether or not a game is even worth preserving in the first place.
It's an interesting topic because the more you go into it, the more you realize there are a million layers, and it's an incredibly dense topic to go over.
Yeah, right. It's an incredibly thick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as you heard from Chris, we do have Nico and Chris here with myself. I feel a little bit more of an expert on this, right? Because I've done a lot of research into game preservation. I did a very large video on game preservation. I've talked to a lot of the people who are kind of in the game preservation space. So I've talked to, Night Dive Studio with Stephen Kick and Larry Kupperman. I've talked to the Game History Foundation, right? I've talked to Frank Cifaldi. I've talked to Kelsey Lewin. I've done these interviews. I have an interview with Good Old Games coming up here shortly about game preservation. So I feel like I'm a little bit more of an expert on this. I'm curious, what is your level of expertise with regards to game preservation, Chris?
I was really hoping you were teeing Nico up. Be like, Nico, what have you done?
Absolutely nothing.
Basically nothing on my end. I'm aware of a lot of it, and I think it's interesting to talk about. The closest I've gotten is maybe some wiki contributions with things over the years, like scanning inserts and front and backs of boxes and discard, stuff like that. But it's something I'm more aware of than something I've actively participated in, because at a point, I feel like it either involves a lot of knowledge and or time that I do not have, or at least a curiosity that I do have, but not the time. You know what I mean?
Sure. So you'd consider yourself to be kind of journeyman, maybe.
Yeah.
You know about it enough.
Yes.
What about you, Nico? You did say nothing, but is it quite nothing? You have no concept of game preservation?
I have thoughts on it. I have things that I think should be upheld, and I have questions about it, but I have no experience on it myself, necessarily.
So I think maybe the best thing to do is kind of to start with our definition of game preservation, because I think that what's going to happen is that as you hear the three definitions between the three of us, it's going to change pretty vastly. So Nico, as somebody who has basically no experience, what is your definition of game preservation?
Yeah. So that is a very tough question, right? I think the first thing that comes to my mind is keeping a game accessible and playable for as long as humanly possible, and there's also a documentation portion of it so that we have less lost media.
Okay. It's an okay definition, I think. Chris, what about you? Would you change his definition in any way?
I go back and forth on this because I think the availability and accessibility of a thing, in an ideal world, there'd be a complete overlap between preservation and that accessibility, but it isn't necessarily the case, especially if you consider corporations want money for things, corporations don't keep track of things, corporations don't want to always offer you things, and really, at a point, who can offer everything to everyone in terms of what's preserved? So, in an ideal world, I think Nico's definition is there, but I think there's also a very strict, pedantic definition to it also of, as long as there is a copy of something somewhere in its entirety, for simplicity's sake, we'll just say source code, even though there's a lot more to it than that. If there's that and other backups, then it's technically preserved, but how much value does that have to a far-reaching, curious audience, right?
Sure. So I'll give you my definition.
Yes.
And I think that this is maybe as good a definition as you can have at this moment, right? Which is game preservation is about maintaining a game's original experience within reason while addressing various challenges and aspects of the game. Right. And I think it's the within reason part that's really, really important, because there are a lot of limiting factors with regards to game preservation. Right. You have, again, physical, digital, whether or not the game is playable at all, remasters and remakes and ports and piracy and hardware and software and all sorts of legal issues. The legal issues on this are insane. And so the biggest thing with regards to a definition of game preservation is that it is an evolving definition that is based on the ongoing discussions in the space at the time. And there is no good definition that will last more than a year or two, right? Even now, even that definition that I have just given, it's as strong as we can get, right? But in a couple of years, that definition may be wildly out of step. So, I think we should just start with like some of the problems in the game preservation space, right? Because then we can kind of discuss about what we would want to do. And I know that Nico has some really fascinating questions, but I think they're the kind of questions that we can't get to until we've kind of laid out what the problems are with preserving a game, right? So, let's just start with why a video game is a difficult thing to preserve versus, say, music or a movie. Right? And the first step, I think, is to realize that a video game is very, very complex. And I know that sounds stupid. I know that sounds really basic. It's like, yeah, of course it's complex.
No, that's
but
legit.
It has a lot of components.
Yeah, this is a thought exercise, right? Like, I had not even considered that, for the record. Like, I'm primarily a musician, so I think about things very often in the audio capacity, and I had not considered A, the interactivity of a video game, and B, the multiple formats of literally everything that go into making it. So that is a very good thought experiment to do, at least, or a good exercise to do when beginning this discussion. So, yeah.
So think about it, right? Like this, Nico. You may have music in a video game. So think about all of the legal things that come in with just a single piece of music. And now imagine that not only might you have, 10, 15, 20 different musics in a single game, but you also have all of the sound effects. Yeah. I mean, you have all of the Foley.
Sonic 3.
Exactly. There's so many different things that come through with that. So you've got graphics, right? So you've got all of the artwork that's in a game. Maybe you have video in the game too. But you have sounds, specifically sounds, not music, but you also have music. You have the UI elements. You have textures. You have models. You have the AI, which may be copyrighted. You have the physics. A lot of people don't realize the physics models in these games are actually proprietary systems. You have the encoding software. So perhaps the software that unencodes and streams the textures in the game itself, they themselves are proprietary and therefore need to be preserved separately. The packaging, if you want the physical packaging, the manuals, if they are in them in the first place. And one of the things that I think that is interesting that disappears really, really quick is the original price, right? This is something that you may not think about, but what is the price of a game when it launches? That's actually kind of hard to find sometimes, So these are all just kind of like parts of what a game is, right? To even begin discussing preserving it.
This is why I love this topic. This is just for like a game. We're talking about
a single game.
And there's like 30 different factors to consider. And sometimes these things don't even get right. Because if we talk about, say, like a re-release of a game, right? It's so easy for things to break, things you wouldn't expect. Like the one that came to my mind when we were talking was Crazy Taxi, the Dreamcast arcade game. Everyone loves Crazy Taxi. That got a version in 2011, I want to say, on like Xbox 360, PS3, PC. For one, all the licensed music wasn't relicensed, which was Offspring, Bad Religion, great soundtrack. All that's gone, replaced with a new licensed soundtrack. But it's even just the audio itself is all pitched differently down. Like all of the voice acting plays at a much lower pitch than it was originally for some reason. And all the sound effects are weird. Some of them are broken. They don't play right. The original experience of Crazy Taxi doesn't come through on those versions. Like, it's not as good. Then you have stuff like, oh, Pizza Hut's not in the game because they couldn't renegotiate with Pizza Hut, right? So like at a point, they sell you Crazy Taxi, but you're not getting Crazy Taxi. You're getting like a weird new off branch of Crazy Taxi that also has a conversation for how it needs to be preserved now, let alone how well or not well it translates certain aspects, right? And that's just one example, again, of like the thousands you could go into on this.
One of my favorite questions to ask in this space right now is a remake or a remaster a faithful preservation of the original, right? And I think that is a really fun question because you start getting into a lot of interesting sort of like, well, what is the thing that you're preserving, right? What is the purpose of the preservation? Is the purpose of the preservation the experience, right? Is it the experiential, what I got out of this? And if so, then a remake or a remaster can, I think, be a very good preservation of that. But is it technically a one-to-one preservation? Absolutely not.
I mean, that is a very Thesean question in nature, right?
Yes, like, actually. Oh boy, I'm so happy you brought that up because the ship of Theseus is exactly a perfect analogy for how much, right? For those of you who are not aware, would you like to explain the ship of Theseus there?
Sure. So the concept of the ship of Theseus, for people who are not super familiar with it, it's the question of if you have a boat and a board breaks and you replace that board and you continue doing this over time until every single part of the boat is replaced, is it the same boat?
And at what point does it stop being the same boat if it's not? Yes. Yeah. So that's a really very relevant question for the question of do remakes, do remasters faithfully preserve it? Would you say that RE4, which just came out, and by all accounts is a lot of fun, right? It's a good game. Is that a faithful adaptation of the original? Yes. Is it a faithful preservation of the original? That's a wholly different question. I think a lot of people would say, no, it's not. And if so, then why not? What part of it is missing? At what point is it no longer that original game? Right? I think that's a really, really fun question. So not only is there the individual preservation of each component, right? Not only do we have to worry about every single thing, we also have the really painful fact that we have one of the most secretive industries in the world here, right? Video game industry kind of sucks at being open and honest and transparent.
Yeah, no, that's actually very true. That's like something I've been struggling with just in my personal, how do I say this? My fifis, if you will, because I do have feelings that are separate from, I guess, my actual thought out opinions, right? And I struggle with that because I like to know what's going on with the things that I like.
I think like the example you would maybe bring up specifically, you're curious about that Elden Ring DLC, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You'd love to have like a better idea of what's going on with that. But as far as Bandai Namco is concerned, you should know that it exists.
Yeah.
And that's all you get to know, you know?
I mean, and that's the thing though, right? Like this goes into the preservation aspect of it because like we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know what efforts there are being taken by the companies that make these games or the developers themselves to future-proof in a way. And when I think about preservation, I think you guys both, maybe Chris more so, I don't really know Moriarty, your history, but like you guys both deal more in the classic game space, whereas I started playing video games in 2018. Not a hard start, but like seriously, you know,
like in earnest.
And
yeah.
And so I tend to look more toward the future. So when I think of preservation, I do think more of like going forward, and that's why this company transparency aspect is such a big thing in my personal zeitgeist right now.
One of the things that I think maybe highlights the problems with this industry, right? Maybe you'll remember a gaming company by the name of Xseed. They do a whole bunch of random Japanese game releases in the Western market. So like Trails of Cold Steel 2. And one of the things that they did with these games, and they came under a lot of fire from it a couple of years ago, is they would remove people from the credits if they stopped working for the company.
Yes.
Right? So that falls into this same sort of secretive industry, sort of kind of incestuous industry, kind of shady industry stuff that's going on here, where you have industry that will not only not put you in the credits, but they'll hide the fact that a thing came out. They will sue people who put the games up on or the artwork up. We just had the Wizards of the Coast send the Pinkertons to somebody's house because they put up a YouTube video that included artwork from an as of yet unreleased not video game, but card-based game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like there is an industry that has this sort of lock down everything and never let anyone know anything. And part of the thing about preservation is that if you want to preserve it, you need to have it, and you need to have it available for everybody. It needs to be up and it needs to be accessible. Mm-hmm. And having an industry that purposefully hides everything makes it very hard to do that. Also, one of the things that I think we're seeing now that's become very relevant, I know that we had The Completionist do a video on it very recently, is sort of hardware obsolescence and the obsolescence of various digital storefronts, right? So this is one that I think maybe your very first question here, Nico, is pretty relevant for, which is, I don't want to ask your question.
Oh no, dude, go for it, because I don't know what order I don't know which one you're thinking of.
So we were talking about Bloodborne, right? Yeah. So how do you preserve this type of a physical product, right? Mm-hmm. And Chris, you had a response to this that I'm actually gonna say no to in a second here. But so I'd like you to answer Nico's question if you could.
Okay, we've not said the question.
Yeah, we've not said the question yet. I had to scroll back through some messages to find this.
About whether or not you can preserve Bloodborne being on an older thing. Right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah. Like,
I'm trying not to ask your question. I'm letting you ask your question.
Well, I didn't know what order they were coming up. Anyway, so, yeah, basically, right, like, the question is, like, what kinds of, and please rephrase me if I'm thinking it differently, but the question is basically, like, what role should the companies take and what steps should they take to preserve their games and future-proof them so that they are still available in the long term, right? So the idea is that right now, the burden of preserving a game like Bloodborne, and this is barring any leaks, and this is barring any what I call perfectly rational business behavior, meaning doing something that they obviously should do to better the business. This is barring any of that. Right now, the impetus stands on the community. People playing Bloodborne have to preserve that game themselves. And at what point should the company step in and say, okay, we are going to preserve this game and put in some effort on our end?
That's not the question I responded to earlier, but I can respond to that because it's hard, because I would say it should be the company's responsibility to preserve it, but they're not very open on if they preserve it, right? We have a lot of instances from the 90s, especially, and like beyond or before that, of course. It still happens sometimes today, I'm sure, where even just the source code of a game, once that game was shipped and done, they would go, we don't need that anymore. The game is done. Don't worry about it. There wasn't a lot of future proofing or thought being spared to the future of anything back then. It was just, all right, it's done. Get rid of everything, make space for something new. So you'd have a lot of instances like that where a lot of stuff from back then is just gone. A lot of vital things that are preventing re-releases of these games now because no one has the source code, right? So you look at it and go, well, it's probably the company's responsibility, first of all, to make sure that everything's backed up, properly digitized and all that stuff. But they're not open about that stuff generally. There's no incentive to be open about it, right? Like Bloodborne might be perfectly archived and preserved at FromSoft for all we know, but you can't trust that they are. So I think it falls back to the community then, right? But then you get to a point of how preserved is it, right? Because you can stick Bloodborne into an emulator, presumably. But if the emulator ever gets so good on hardware that it's performing past what Bloodborne did on PS4, right? Like if it runs at a consistent 60 frames per second, 4K, is that preserving the game or is that enhancing the game through the software? So that is also a very complex question of what exactly is preserving Bloodborne. Now, Moriarty, I'd like to throw back to you. I don't think I said the thing you said no to. So what was the thing I said no to earlier that you could say no to?
Yeah, and I don't remember which
so the question
we had a different conversation,
whether,
I think. Yeah.
The question at hand was whether or not Sony not allowing or not updating Bloodborne past 30 frames per second and therefore it eventually becoming kind of unplayable means that the game can't be preserved, right? And the response that Chris originally had there was, well, there's millions of copies of Bloodborne, so it's preserved. And the argument there is that hardware obsolescence does exist, right? There were millions of Dreamcast games out there. It's pretty hard to play a Dreamcast game today because most of the original Dreamcasts that exist do not work. Their drives are broken, right? Like there's very few that have the drive that actually works. So if you want to play an original Dreamcast game today, it's almost impossible to do so, at least without the following two things of emulation and piracy, right? Those are the two things that allow you to play these games today. However, we are going to take a short break. And we're going to shoot to whatever our advertiser would be because we're bringing on a special guest here in a second. So we're going to have our we're going to go to our BRB screen and then we'll be right back.
We're doing that. Be right back. Hi, we're back.
Hey, and we are back with our special guest, Travis,
Hello.
that Trav guy. Trav.
I put my glove on wrong. Hold on.
It was the snowmobile accident.
Yeah, that's why I'm wearing gloves now. They're actually casts. But hey, how's it going? I'm running late because my power decided to go out. And I was like, I don't even know if it's going to come back. So I'll let you guys know. And then it was like barely 20 minutes past when we were slated to start. And it came back. So I'm like, please let me back. I miss you so much.
And here he is. I love having him. So Trav, I'm curious, what is your definition of game preservation?
My definition of game preservation is whatever the internet says it is during that time. So it changes every 2 weeks.
It sure does. That's an excellent answer. Oh, wow.
I should say for the record, I've barely prepared for this podcast because I'm incredibly cocky that I just know what I'm going to say.
Good.
Because this is a topic that I have thought about a lot in that I'm not even sure if it matters to the degree that people make it out to be. But I don't know where you guys are in the conversation yet. So
no, we'll talk about that a little bit later because I think you're absolutely right. Whether or not game preservation really matters is a whole different thing. So,
but I guess to give it a quick answer, to answer your question real fast, game preservation. When I usually think about it, it's people taking something that they purchased legally and converting it into a digital file, typically to use with emulation. That's what comes to mind, regardless of the nuances that I think come along with that.
Sure. So I'll give you my definition so that you can hear where I'm coming at it from, which is that game preservation is about maintaining a game's original experience within reason.
Okay.
I think that's the best that I got. But you're absolutely right that the definition is evolving all the time. And one of the reasons that evolves so much, and I think that, it's an interesting minefield, is DRM. So how many of you have a library on Steam?
I need to ask what DRM
I don't even know what that
stands
is.
for. Yeah, what is
Nico, a great question.
Oh, no, I was joking. Sorry.
DRM is
digital rights media or digital rights management. So it's the thing that stops you from copying a game, right?
So imagine you buy a game on Steam, and then you load that game up that you downloaded onto a flash drive. You put it onto another computer, and it tells you, like when you try to run the game, it says you A, need Steam, and B, need to be logged into your account to play this game. It is that lock that keeps you from playing it on without that authentication service, in this case Steam. That's DRM in this case.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
It can usually ping back to a server as well, which means if that server ever goes down, you can lose access to the game if it isn't able to run back and do that check, which is probably pertinent to the topic in this case.
Pretty pertinent. So what happens if Steam goes down, right? How do you preserve a game if Steam goes down? How do you handle it if it's an online only game like an MMO or let's say Fortnite, right? One of the most played games in the world, with, I don't know, like I said, 350 million monthly users, I think. What do you do if you want to preserve that experience? How can you? How can you even begin to?
That is
in my
just
mind,
such a...
I literally cannot comprehend how you could preserve a game like Fortnite with how the internet treats game preservation.
That's such an overwhelming thought, right? Like, I don't know how to say it any better, but like that thought terrifies me, and I don't know what that says about my attachment to like my Fortnite skin library.
Well, I mean, if you want to get literal, like preserving Fortnite, there's a world where every update pushed out into the world for Fortnite is a layer that needs preserved, right? Like, this isn't Fortnite, but, you know, me, Justin, and Kevin play Apex a lot, right? There are time spans of that game that you cannot experience in ways that game played and things in the map and the way the map was laid out that you cannot access anymore until they decided to bring it back for anniversary events, right? But then you're still playing with all the new character changes, the way they play, their stats, the gun damage and drop off and all this stuff. Just imagine, like, preserving Fortnite is a thought. Then you think about preserving Fortnite and every step along the way. Like, can you access the concerts in Fortnite after they end, or are those like limited? You know, like that's just limited, another facet entirely.
They're limited.
That's a really good point. I'll bring up something that's even more daunting, perhaps.
Yes, please.
Imagine an MMO, which Fortnite kind of is, but now imagine trying to back up every single patch and every single version of the server on WoW. World of Warcraft has a patch every week, right? How do you maintain that? Yeah, I think still. I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah,
but there's millions of people still playing it. It's been out for, I don't know, 20 years now at this point. Yeah. Imagine trying to back up 20 years of World of Warcraft and making it so that it is in some way playable, right? If there's a patch every week, and we're talking about patch 16.2.11.99-F, how do you do that?
Then there's also, like what you said, making it playable. That's a huge thing for me because, sure, I guess if someone has access to, they could totally just dump the files for every update and have them archived. But there's no way to access them, especially with an MMO that's usually doing real-time checks of your files of the game to make sure that you're usually not cheating.
Making it playable is a huge problem. There are ways to do it. Right? There are file systems that allow you to kind of maintain just the changes from point to point, but that's still difficult, and it still doesn't really answer the how do you make it so that this is a playable experience in some way? Because when you think about that, right, trying to make it playable in any way is a whole different game ball. Because what I would argue with a game like MMO, right, or rather with a game genre like an MMO,
MMO the game.
MMO the game. It is not the code that made that game, right? It's the 150,000 people on your server. It's the huge group of people that are sitting in, a main city. It's being part of that kind of zeitgeist. I don't think you can preserve that, and I think that the way that you preserve that, I will talk about a little bit later. But I just want you to think about it for a moment,
gentlemen.
Hi.
We are going to preserve a vibe. We are here to preserve a vibe.
Yeah, how do you do that?
I'll drink to that.
Yeah, because you can access.
Like, that's definitely it.
Like in this hypothetical
world. How do you
world
do that?
where,
You have Nico in the call.
Yeah. Gentlemen,
does pass the
this
vibe
may be
check.
visionary. This may be a visionary idea, but we have to preserve the vibe. We're going to jar the vibe up, package it, sell it. Vibe
You can put me in a
preservation.
jar.
I might.
Yeah, dude, that's such a harrowing question. Chris, you go. You had something to say.
I was just going to say, to that point, even if we do preserve this hypothetical 12.0.3.A.B of World of Warcraft, if you're in there by yourself, then what's the point? You know,
Right, yeah,
Even if you can
absolutely.
wrangle a few friends together to play on that instance of that game, you're still
Absolutely.
exploring like an abandoned village, essentially.
Well, and that's
Yes.
the thing, right? If a game like a Minecraft, let's say, were to just all of a sudden be like no servers, like you can't, like you're not allowed to do Minecraft servers anymore, right? Like Minecraft's still like, it is a very social game, but it's nothing like an MMO.
Well, yeah.
Like,
I mean,
you
with
can
Minecraft,
still-
I could speak to this because I have experience with it. There are still versions of Minecraft all the way down to like pre-alpha that you
Yeah.
can still access today and play.
Yeah.
But you know, like you said, there are servers that have entire mechanics that are modded into that server that can't really be replicated on a local. I mean, I guess they could, but you would need all of the files in a way that you would need permission to back up.
And again, it comes back to preserving that vibe. I don't like to say vibe so much. I don't really
I do.
like that concept, but like I do. God. But yeah, I mean, the question of how do you preserve a game like an MMO is such a what a tragic question.
I almost think you can't. The best I feel like you can do
Yeah.
is
That's where I am.
maybe something Moriarty was about to get to. If we played the game and we recorded gameplay capture and we recorded our audio and we played it for a while and just showed off the experience of that patch, that instance, that update, 30 years from now, someone could watch that and see people in the world and see the things we do and the way the UI looks and the way the game plays and all that stuff. And that's like a glimpse, but I don't think
Yes.
you can ever properly encapsulate that. But that feels like the best you can kind
Yeah.
of do is to...
So there's three ways, right?
Yes.
And I'm so happy you brought that up because yes, that is I think the correct way to do it. So you have choosing something that is kind of the view of that game that you would want. So you saw that, or maybe you didn't, but World of Warcraft has been releasing their previous DLC expansion packs, whatever, as like WoW Classic and WoW Burning whatever Classic and all that, right? And what they did is they just chose a point that they felt between, version 1 and version 100, and they said, well, we think that version 60 is the iconic version of this game, and so we're just going to choose that one and throw it out there. Right, and that is the version of the game that everybody gets. And you just don't get anything before it, and you don't get anything after it. And that is certainly one way to do it. Another way to do it is to make a remake or a remaster and say, this is the way that we would choose to do it. And one of the ways that we saw with the Museum of Modern Art, they chose to show a video. And they did it of EVE, right? So EVE Online, how do you possibly do that, right? Like, this is a massive mega game that takes, I don't know, thousands of hours to even be okay at, right? And everything in it is just kind of ridiculous. Yes, Nico is raising his hand. What is
Eve?
It's a video game.
Okay, I could have guessed that.
It's a
Thank you.
a video game space simulation that you spend a lot of real life money on to have big ships that can be destroyed in a matter of minutes.
It's huge. It's massive. It's mostly okay. So like picture a spreadsheet and imagine playing that.
Do that every day, man.
That's what Eve is.
Nico's
And
like
it's
already
fascinating.
pro at Eve, yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, it's a fascinating game. I think it's really interesting. I would never want to play it. It's very, 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 very,
is not
very
my thing.
Eve. Yeah, right. It's not my thing either. But they wanted to preserve the game, right? And how do you do that? Because for most people, their experience of playing Eve is looking at a spreadsheet. Like, honestly, that's That's what the gameplay is like. And it takes, hundreds to thousands of hours to get to a point where you can do anything in that game, right? So what they did is they took a single space in the game, right? Like a single, solar system or whatever. And they told everybody, we're going to record everything that happens in this space over a 24-hour period. And people did things in that space. And they recorded that, and then they took that and they edited it together like a 20-minute video that shows what happened during that 24 hours. And they recorded and saved that video. And that video is what's in the Museum of Modern Art.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, yes, the answer is you preserve the experiential part of it if you can't preserve everything, right? Because the, quote, vibe really is the part of the game that is missing, right? Like, if we're talking about Fortnite, or we're talking about WoW, or we're talking about anything where you can't go home and play it, right? Yeah, that's it. If we're talking about City of Heroes, right, which is maybe one of the most prolific video games to just disappear overnight, right? It was out there. It was huge MMO. People loved City of Heroes, and then it was just gone. And you can't play City of Heroes anymore. And they've been trying for years to recreate City of Heroes, and they took the source code and they tried to make another server, and they just couldn't do it. It's kind of okay, but it's not great, kind of a thing, right? Even then, you couldn't get it right. So really, YouTube videos. I think YouTubers are some of the best game preservationists out there, because we're showing what it's like to really play that game in the time period that it was out and available.
And especially video game YouTubers who have like a small army of creators on the same wavelength. So, for example, I know there are a lot, and this is just coming from my world. I'm sure you guys will have other examples that are maybe more prominent. Once again, back to Minecraft. People who have just like 5-6 creators on the same Minecraft server, and they are, they all make the content together, and it's videos of them playing Minecraft together. That specifically captures that vibe. That specifically like takes that vibe, puts it in a fixed format, and then it is out there. So
Minecraft.
And for those for our audio listeners, Trav is holding up just the cutest statuette of Minecraft zombie.
It's Moriarty.
That is Moriarty, yeah.
Very close to me, yeah.
Yeah. Moriarty is exactly that size too. He's literally 5 inches tall.
It's true. It's true. It's been a hard life, but here we are. So I'll give you an example as well that I think maybe will resonate with our retro gamer crowd a little bit. There was a Zelda game that was broadcast live over the, I don't know, whatever it was, Nintendo something or other.
It was a satellite service, yeah.
Yeah, it was a satellite service. I can't remember what it was called, but it was like the Nintendo Ninty. It was the
Zelda BS was the acronym or something. Yeah.
No, it was Satellaview. That was it. I was close. Ninty. And this game was downloaded every week, and it overwrote its previous thing. So you would go online, and you download, through satellite, this weekly hour or two long gameplay experience of Zelda, and then every week it would, re-download a new version, but they never saved it. Nintendo didn't save it. It's not out there. You cannot play it, right? There have been people who have tried to recreate it off of the little bits that were left on the Satellaview cartridges that weren't overwritten because, the people never got into it again, or they died, or whatever. And there have been people who tried to do it based off of their memory as well, and off of people who, wrote things and took little videos. And there's ways that they have tried to recreate this, but for all intents and purposes, it is a game that you can never play again, and you can't even see it anymore. Right? Like, it's not there because we were in a pre-YouTube era. Whereas today, if that were released, it would be on a Let's Play by, some 3-sub YouTuber immediately.
Right. And there was another layer of this where I think there was voice acting in that. Like, it was like a radio drama overlaid on top of the game additionally.
you would like cool. listen to a show they'd put out on the satellite. You'd like watch a show or listen to it for 20 minutes or whatever before the game played. And again, all of this is just gone.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of part of the problems when we're looking at preservation, right? We have company closures, we have the digital preservation costs, we've got, how do you share resources between these things? We have the lack of organizations involved in it. We have all the various components of a game. And the important thing is that like everything we're talking about, again, comes back to every single component. So the graphics, the sounds, the music, the UI, the textures, the models, the AI, the packaging, the manuals, the price, right? Those are all things that are part of that each one has to be addressed differently. And then there is the legal trouble, right?
Let's go.
Sonic 3. Sonic 3.
Is it legal to emulate a video game?
Jury's still out on that, according to Nintendo. Even if it's your own backups, we don't condone that.
Yeah, and I think Trav hit on something there, though, right?
I can hit a lot of things.
Well, here's the thing.
Well,
right?
before that, I do want to make it very clear that it is 100% legal to emulate.
Yes. Illegal.
Legal. It is legal.
It is legal.
Legal. It is 100%
it is legal.
legal.
Nintendo does not want it to be. It is against their terms of service, which isn't exactly the same as the law. But if they catch you emulating games that you own and you ripped on your own with your own tools and did not download from a third-party service, they still have the right to deny you service if they catch you.
Right.
Gotcha.
So just before we go any further on it, it is legal to emulate. You can emulate. This is absolutely 100% a legal thing.
There goes our Nintendo sponsorship.
Right. Right.
I'm sure we would have had that if not for this moment.
I mean, that is a very good, I think, point to make starting this, because that definitely changes my flavor of this conversation. But I do think Trav struck on something, right? Like, if you already purchased the game, thank you, Trav. If you already purchased the game, and it's your backups that you're playing, why should Nintendo care, right? Do they want you to purchase another copy of the game? And furthermore, I know that it's a huge problem in the Nintendo community when they stop making games available or when they delist them and you can no longer play them by any legal means. At that point, I would argue not only is it the way to go to emulate the game, but also it is at that point correct.
So I have some strong thoughts on this, but if there's anything that you want to get out there first before I start going on a tangent, I will give you that.
No, well, so I guess I can address very quickly that it is somewhat legally understood at this point that you can emulate and preserve a video game that is no longer available legally, as long as there's no way to get the product legally. This is why museums are allowed to have uploaded versions of video games, right? This is why, like, the Video Game History Foundation exists and hasn't been sued into oblivion, is because there has been some level of understanding that as long as it can't be played, you can do that. There are some caveats there, so don't go starting your own museum based off of my words here, because I'm not your lawyer.
Darn.
But just understand that like there is some level of, if this game's been pulled off of a service, then you can preserve it in certain ways legally. So I think you had a rant?
Yeah, and I admit I lost part of that thread. But it was basically going to be like trying to understand why, like, what is Nintendo's logic there? And we've seen that, I guess the main part that I wanted to address, aside from the myriad of reasons that I'll probably grab out of the air while I'm explaining this, is that we've seen it with the whole Mother 3 fiasco with Nintendo. There are cartridges out there. There is a publicly available fan-made translation of the Game Boy Advance game Mother 3 fully playable in English, that the creator has been adamant about how they will take this down if Nintendo ever decides that they are going to make their own version of it, and Nintendo, do their own localization for a re-release, hypothetically. And Nintendo has, to my understanding, never taken action against this guy, who is literally providing a way, a mod, a very well-known mod, which Nintendo also does not seem to be a fan of, for a game that has a lot of maybe a vocal minority amount of support, but still, like, I'm pretty sure that Nintendo is aware of it, and they are choosing not to do anything. And the accepted reasoning, I'm not sure if it was ever confirmed, but the accepted reasoning, especially after the case of AM2R, the Metroid 2 fan remake, that Nintendo will go after projects that they believe could affect the sales of an existing game that they are either currently working on or is out, which is probably why every Pokemon fan game gets taken down, despite them not even having the same mechanics. But, Metroid 2 remake made sense. They were developing it at the time, regardless of if it's their right to take it down or if they should have. They did, and it's understandable from their point of view that they did. And then there's cases like Mother 3 where they actively choose not to, because they clearly have no plans to bring it over for a Western translation. Mm-hmm. That was the bulk of it. Don't entirely remember where I was going to go from it, but I hope that you're able to build off of that, because I am winded and I need a breather.
Yeah, no, so there is sort of this... all right, so this is one of my issues with game preservation and with the game industry as a whole, and it's something that, boy, I can definitely rant at some people about as well. Should a video game developer be allowed to put out a game and then take it away from sale and then also make it disappear, right? Should they be able to come down and say, this game was public and it was available and you bought it, and now we don't want you to play it anymore, and so we have taken it and it's gone. You can't buy it anywhere legally, and also we're going to come down on the people who are hosting it, maybe illegally, because it's piracy or emulation or whatever. Or are we going to come down on the people who are doing that? Or are we going to make it impossible?
Oh, dude.
And my issue here is that the reason that they typically are doing it is because they're going to eventually sell another version of it, right? So they're keeping it hidden away from you so that they can sell the remaster. And I believe there was a recent case where a game was remastered and all of the originals were pulled off. I feel like it was a Nintendo thing. I think maybe we know what this... Do you have something to say, Chris?
I was thinking Sonic. What Nintendo game were you thinking of? Because I was like, I know where he's going.
I was thinking of... this is not Nintendo. I was thinking of Grand Theft Auto.
I was thinking of Flappy Bird.
Okay, we all went in different directions, which says something.
Wow,
here, I think.
we really are covering every corner of the gamer face.
I don't even need to bring up my Nintendo example anymore. No, yeah. So Sonic, maybe Chris, you can talk a little bit more about Sonic there.
There was a weird, very specific thing that happened where for over a decade, a very long time, you could buy Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles on Steam. And what it would do, these were poorly emulated versions of these games to start with. But when you bought it, it would come with an actual legal ROM. They would give you that alongside the purchase of the game. Then they set up a Steam Workshop thing where you could basically legally load mods into the ROM they legally gave you. And it was great. It was really cool. It wasn't the ideal way to play it if you went through the Steam front end, but you could extract the ROM and put it into a better emulator or whatever you wanted to do with it. It was really cool. Sonic Origins comes out June 23rd last year, the anniversary, and they delist all the old Sonic games, meaning you can't legally get those ROMs anymore. Which, if you look at it purely on the surface, you would go, well, you can just play those games that they delisted in Sonic Origins. But these Sonic Origins versions are remakes. On the front end, they're widescreen, nice versions of the game that look identical, but they're remakes of those games that run in an entirely different engine, replicating the original physics, the way it looks and plays and sounds and all this stuff. But it's not the same game, and it behaves differently, and there's different physics patterns, and like you're more likely to get crushed by things in this new engine and stuff like that. So you're have these $5 versions of Sonic games taken away from you that give you the literal, actual legal ROM with it, in preference of this collection that gets the job done. You know, I'd say for most people, it's probably the ideal way to play it, right? But you get to a weird point where even if the company is replicating that original experience and giving you what's on paper, probably a better experience for most people, right? Like hardcore Sonic fans can nitpick that thing all day, but for most people, it's a better experience. But is it right to get rid of that original version to offer them something different that's attempting to be the same, but also isn't? Especially in the topic of preservation.
Yeah,
that's a great question. Before you jump in there, Nico, Trav, I would like to ask the same question there with regards to your GTA.
Okay.
Because they removed GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas when they introduced the trilogy, the definitive edition.
Definitive.
Would you say that was a better experience for players?
It was good for the YouTube comments, Terry channel time. No, it sucked. It was only good for content. In that there were really funny videos that came out about it. And that's really it. That's all I can think of. No, it sucked. They actively took away this classic game so that they could upsell you. I don't even know if it's upselling if they take away the thing you're buying in the first place. So that they could charge more for something that is actually worse, except this one now is loaded with their launcher that can bring you to microtransaction town.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it is actively worse. Like, it's a lot worse.
TikTok, it's microtransaction o'clock.
The GTA trilogy remaster is a trash fire. And I don't know how I got through it. I don't know how I got through any sort of QA. It's insane. Another example.
I don't think they cared, simply enough. I think that they legitimately wanted to use it as a platform to make money, to sell the Rockstar launcher that the game runs through. I think that they just wanted more that they could suck in from the player. That's all I can think of. I don't know why else they would do it the way they did, unless it was just very short-term greed.
There are a lot of companies who tend to go in this sort of negative space like that. I think another very good example is Warcraft 3, which used to be playable, right? And then they replaced it with the remastered Warcraft 3, which was broken.
I've heard that's not good.
It's just broken, and they introduce a whole bunch of other stuff into it as well, including a TOS that doesn't allow you to take any of the mods that are created for it and own them. So there's all sorts of different stuff, and they delisted the original, so you can't play the original anymore. So there's a lot of stuff in that where like companies do these types of things, right? And when they do that, they also try to say that they still own everything, so you can't do anything. You had a point there?
I want to propose a quick mini tangent to you, but I want to let you finish your thought.
No, please.
So, I don't know if anyone in here will get this except for Moriarty, so I'll make it quick. Deus Ex 3, Human Revolution. Original version comes out. Generally praised gameplay, really negative against the bosses, and it's pre-order content from back in the day. Later on, Director's Cut comes out. It's basically a Game of the Year version that also fixed the boss fights that were not good in the original release. They outsourced them to a different studio while they were making the main game, so the boss fights had this really bad style mismatch with the rest of the game. They fix them so that they work, so that players that spec'd for a stealthy build are still able to beat them without going into a boss fight that's like, oh, well, I don't know how, I literally cannot beat this. So they fix that. They ship off this new release, and now you can't buy that original version on digital storefronts anymore. Do you think that is a negative point brought up? Or do you think that because they're offering in what my opinion is a better version of the game that fixes a lot of issues and incorporates a lot of DLC into the base game now, is it a bad thing for a studio to, I guess, re-release the same game during the same generation, I'm pretty sure, but still strip away that original version? Like, at what point do we care about that original release because it was different? Like, should we want to preserve it simply because, oh, well, that was just a different version of it, which I guess ties it back to that original idea about MMOs and all that versions of World of Warcraft and whatever. Like, should we give a shit that the original version of this game cannot be played anymore without having to find a copy online?
You have posed such an excellent question.
Well, hold on. I have a thought really quick on the stuff that we were talking about before. The thing I was going to jump in on earlier, which was essentially, right? Like Moriarty had asked this question when Chris was making his point. The question of should companies be able to do this? Should companies be able to just delist things and make them unavailable forever and ever and ever in any format, right? And that's why my mind went to Flappy Bird, because I mean, look,
I laugh, but that's a good example.
It's a lot easier to do that when you have one developer on a stupid little app that was so impactful, right? So the answer of should they be able to? Yeah, I guess so. They can do whatever they want. It's their property.
I'm sure that if we dig deep enough into it, we can find negatives to an example that, like, oh yeah, maybe they should take that down.
Yeah. I mean, sure, right? Like, I'm not talking about whether it's good or bad that they take it down. I lied. I am gonna say that because to your point, I'm sure we could find an example where they taking it down is probably good, but like outside of like, should they be able to? Yes, it's their property. Like, is it cool for them to do? I would say no. I would say yes, you can do it, but it's not cool. Sorry, that's all I needed to get to. I'm gonna continue
both
down.
Both of you brought up some really good stuff, and one of the things that I love about this conversation so much is that none of them have answers. So,
no.
I was talking to Larry Cooperman. He's the COO for Night Dive Studios, who does a lot of remakes and remasters, and his argument is this. If I have a car and I choose to take my car and park it in the garage and close the garage and no one can ever see my car again, that is my right because it is my car.
Basically, yeah, right? Basically what I was saying.
And if you come into my garage and steal my car, you're still a thief, and it is my right not to allow you to drive my car.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I think that is a take. But at the same time, it is my belief that if you have a one-of-one car, then I should be able to take a photo of it when it's out on the street. And really what you're saying to me is that I need to go burn my photos. And I think that's not right. Right? So, you were driving this car, you had it before it was parked in the garage, and I took a lot of photos and some videos, and now that you've parked it in the garage, you're showing up saying, I want you to destroy your photos and videos. And I don't think that's a good answer there. So
I feel like that metaphor works really well for this trend that we've been seeing of decompilation projects.
Sure.
If you've been seeing a lot of those.
Yeah. I mean, that's maybe too much of a divergence here, but yes, I think that.
My bad.
I think that is.
This is a topic I'm very passionate about. I'm very excited to be here.
Me too. So with regards to Deus Ex Human Revolution, because your question was whether or not that is or is not good, I'm going to say that somebody who's kind of a diehard with this would say that it was bad that it was taken out. But I think that you've posed a very good question. I think that question that you've asked is something where you can definitely talk for hours about it and come out with no resolved singular answer. Because personally, I think no. If you've got a better version of the game, then I don't care that the older version of the game is gone, right? Like, this is the better version.
Like, it is an objectively better, more stable version that fixes things that the studio was not able to address beforehand.
Yes, exactly. I think that in that case, I don't care that the original is gone. I play that game through stealth. I hated the boss fights. So, I'm super happy to be able to play the game on the definitive edition. But at the same time, if you're a purist, is that preserving it? Well, some purists would say no. I think that, a YouTube video is a good preservation of the experience of World of Warcraft. A purist would say no. We need to have every single patch. And we need to be able to have every server-side patch as well so that we can run the servers so that we can play any version of the game ever, like Minecraft.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, right? Like, that's the hard part, is it all comes down to this. Because then you start having, in every single one of these legal things, right, we start throwing, okay, but here's another one. So there's copyright law, which is already a thing, right? Ooh. There's the fair use complexity of these things. But what about the limited lifespan of games with regards to licensed characters or licensed music, right? Like the Back to the Future video games from Telltale. You cannot buy those anymore. I mean, not
Really? I didn't know that.
not because Telltale's gone, but yeah, they pulled those. They pulled those a long time ago.
I mean, that
Wow, I
because
totally missed
that
that.
makes sense. Out of all the things that
Licensed
they
game.
could pull, that is one of those things that, you know, the mouse would say, "Hey, do not pull or do not
the mouse.
sell." Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
So it's one of those things where it's like, look, this game is gone because it had a 10-year license and it's not there anymore. Another really good example is the it was a good example in my brain up until this very DuckTales. So DuckTales was a game that people loved back on the 80s. They played it on Sega or whatever, right? And then they brought out a re-release of DuckTales, but they only did the thing for so long, so that went away. Another one for my limited run games people out there was Scott Pilgrim.
Let's go.
Yo, limited run?
Man.
Right? Scott Pilgrim, which had to be brought because of all that stuff. So, and I like that example because it gives me a chance to say that limited runs are scam artists, which is always good. It's always a good opportunity to say that, and I'm happy and proud to say it here.
I've been noticing a larger amount of people in like the comments of their posts being like, "Hey, this kind of feels like a scam."
Yeah.
I've been seeing so much more of that. People realizing like, hey, if your whole thing is physical forever, how come you're taking it off shelves?
Well, yeah. So I bring up limited run here, not just to shit on them, though I always love to do that because I think they're a terrible company, but also because they purport that what they do is preservation. Right?
Okay.
So they say that when they put out, Lawbreakers, that they're preserving that game. And I have a really hard time thinking that is preservation.
I was gonna say I as an outsider, right? As someone who's not familiar with this company generally, and what they do, in my mind, the question is, how would it be preservation? And I don't think it'd be a good answer other than physical copies and that's it. Because, again, we talked about the degradation of hardware. Like, just having a physical copy of something does not make it fully preserved. It just prolongs it a little.
Yeah.
It's a difficult thing because one of the things they'll specialize in is repros of games, reproductions. I don't remember what specific classic games, but basically insert old NES, SNES, whatever game. They'll put it on a cartridge that will play in that original system. Like you can just put it in there and it'll play. But I guess maybe back to the Ship of Theseus question, right? Like there's a version of that game in the reproduction and you put it in and it plays. And for the most part, you get the experience of playing the game. So they're preserving, I guess, maybe the experience in that way. But when everything of the cartridge itself is newly made, is that preserving the original game, or is it making a new thing that has to be preserved along the way and isn't actually preserving the old thing?
That sounds a lot like game cosplaying.
Game cosplay.
I like it.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like these files cosplaying as the original game.
Yeah,
very good.
It's an interesting.
I mean, like,
facsimile.
is it still preservation
Facsimile.
if they're getting the blessing and often legal blessing that requires a lot of red tape and loopholes of the original company that made the games?
Depends
Like
on who you
that
ask.
part always kind of rubbed me the wrong way because they like I get it. There are cases where you want to go through the legal loopholes to make sure that you can release a product like that. And if they were a small, humble little group, yeah, that makes sense that you would want to do that. But then at what point is it preservation and you just not reselling an old product that a company wanted to resell anyway? Just so that, you can cash in on that trend.
Especially when a game shows up on limited run and then all of the emulation sites have to pull down everything because now the game is available for sale again. I think that we can move on to... I kind of have three last things that we can talk about.
I have one more joke.
overarching.
I have one more joke. It's
Go
that,
ahead, Nico.
It's that limited run said, "This is not the greatest game in the world. This is just a tribute." Sorry, that's it. That's
Thank
the
you,
joke.
Jack Black.
That's it.
I love
Thank you, Jack Black. We love you, Jack
so
Black.
good.
Sorry, continue,
So
Moriarty.
I have three other things that we can kind of talk about because I think that you'll find that there are no answers, right? Like that's the thing that you learn when you look into game preservation is there are no answers.
Yep.
And we can just sit here and argue back and forth about what should or shouldn't be, but it doesn't matter because there are no answers. So here's the next question kind of in the game preservation space, which is a digital game or is a digital reproduction of a game or is the digitization of a piece of media, whether it be, a card or a magazine or whatever, is that enough preservation? Because I tell you, there's quite a lot of people out there who would argue that if you're not playing a game on the original piece of hardware, you're not playing the original game.
Those people need a smaller horse. That horse is pretty high. I'm not gonna lie to you.
It's a great
That
way
took
of putting
me a
it,
second.
Nico.
Yeah, I was
me too. I thought you were going somewhere else.
horses into this one.
No,
All right.
I think that's so like I don't think that's a very accessible and inclusive take, and therefore I say that it is a little bit on a high horse.
You just sort of pointed out exactly what these kind of people believe, though. They don't care about it being accessible. They just want to gatekeep it and feel like, yeah, I have it. I'm preserving it.
All right, well, they can sit in a room with no friends for years. Like, I'm
pretty sure they do.
There are specific things where it makes sense, right? Obviously, like with
Sure.
accessories, right? Like I was thinking earlier today about Sega's Seaman, as you do on a cold Tuesday. It was a Dreamcast game, I guess for Nico's reference and anyone else,
Thank you.
where you would just have a little fish in an aquarium with a human man face, and you would use the Dreamcast microphone to speak to it. And it would kind of register your inputs and like grow or something based on whatever. I don't really know, because maybe there's a way to emulate the Dreamcast microphone by now, but I don't know. Let's say hypothetically there isn't. The only way I can play Seaman is original hardware with that original microphone. But that's a specific fringe case, right? Like for the most part, a game is inserted into a cartridge slot or it goes into a disc slot and then it plays. And I think at that point, the question is just, is it performing like the original game? Are the sound effects coming through properly? Is the music playing and looping correctly? Are the loading times reasonable? Like this is such a variable, nuanced, million different percentile of correctness conversation.
And I would argue it gets so much more nuanced as we start talking about more modern games that have maybe say a day one patch that is required to play, because at that point is that physical version actually even playable, or are we just talking about a digital game with a Steam code on it on the disc, right? Mm-hmm. So that conversation is absolutely something there where like what is is this game even actually a physical game anymore, or is it a digital game that you're playing with a controller, and is the hardware in any way relevant or important to the conversation?
I have to say this, and this is just me going off on a tangent.
Ooh.
I guess a byproduct of the day one patch, of course, is preservation. I hate day one patches. In fact, I hate all patches. Leave the game the same so that I can just play it. Anyway, I digress. I think that's a really good...
I've made my point. No more.
I think it's a really good point that Moriarty brings up, because it is like not preserving the spirit of the game on day one, right? Like, we go back to Bloodborne. I put that in a PS4 in 2050, right? And they delist everything about it, and the PS4 store is down. I can't update Bloodborne. It's just the base game, and that is not the game I know. So that's why I don't like day one patches. That's one of the reasons, anyway.
Well, then you get to a fun thing of, will your PS4 even work in 2050?
Sure. That notwithstanding. That notwithstanding.
I love your takes, Nico. They're all so good.
Thank you. So do I.
They give me a lot of feelings.
Thank you.
What are they? What are you feeling?
I kind of don't want to address
Why not?
Oh man,
I don't want to
even know
have this
where I was-
conversation again, Nico.
Fair.
I don't even
fair.
know where I was
Like,
going.
I-
With this
Valid.
one.
I think that like day one patches are a result of the work environment that these games are made in and not exactly meant to be a way that a game is meant to be played at launch.
That's also a problem.
Yes, that is a huge problem and is why I have a problem with your take of I'm going to play the game. Shut up, day one patch. I'm playing the game.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of games where like patches.
I think that
have,
just
have,
with how it is, you should not just be like skip update.
Even major releases like Pokemon Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, for
Oh
example.
no, I'll give you an even better one. How about Final Fantasy 14?
Oh, okay, yes. That is
Right,
a
if
much
we're
better
talking
example.
about like
You've
if
just
we're
lost
talking about
Nico.
original version of games, right? Final Fantasy 14 is a trash fire game and has been literally rebuilt from the ground up. It's a whole different game, and if you were to try to play the original Final Fantasy 14, you're playing a different game than everybody else.
Did that-
like literally different game.
Did that come out before or after 13.2?
I actually don't know.
That's a great question,
I
but I don't know what it has to
actually
do with
don't
anything.
I hate that I don't know this.
Well, I'm
Like,
trying to
maybe-
get a time. I'm trying to get like a rough time period of like what this game is. Is it modern? Is it not? I don't know.
It is modern now.
Like-
It wasn't back then because it's been updated to be practically being a completely different game.
Like
Right, gotcha.
Completely different.
2013,
Basically re-released.
2013ish, 2012, that era. Let's say.
Okay.
They re-released the game years later as a whole different game. They even call it Final Fantasy 14, whatever,
A Realm
a new
Reborn.
beginning,
Yeah.
a Realm Reborn. Yeah. So I think that's a really good example of like what you're talking about with regards to patches. But I don't think this is particularly relevant to the idea. Of
Sorry.
it. But I do think that is an interesting question because the people that you would talk to in the purist space would say that you should be preserving the original version of a game, right? So that would mean preserving Final Fantasy 14. It would mean preserving the version of a game that needs a day one patch and can't run without it. And I think that is not worth preserving. And that brings us into my second to last section here, which is, are all games worth preserving?
I was waiting for this to come up, especially.
Ba-ba-ba-da.
Yes.
So it is my opinion. I'm going to be pretty blatant here. Not all games are worth preserving or worth the effort of preserving because of cultural impact or personal significance, right? So if a game is very important to you personally, maybe you'll choose to preserve that game. And if a game is very culturally important, if it has a huge impact, then yeah, maybe that should be preserved. There are certainly some games that have impacted the world, right? Space Invaders. There were so many people playing Space Invaders that there was a quarter shortage in the United States. And that's wild. It's wild to even think about, right? So something like that maybe deserves, right? Quote, deserves to be preserved. Mm-hmm. But does the random dollar game on the Wii U eShop or the indie game thrown up onto I don't know,
Steam,
whatever
it's
itch.io,
Yeah.
right? Like, does that deserve, right? Beyond just the fact of like, oh, this is we're going to take the personal significance part of that out of it. Does it deserve to be preserved?
What do you mean you don't want to play Echo the Dolphin in 50 years? What are you talking about?
Hey, that's an
Honestly,
important game. Watch it.
This is something that I've been thinking of for a while now, and I was waiting for a good time to mention it. And I think now's a good time. At what point should we actively even bother trying to preserve a playable take of a game rather than turn to a history book sort of example? It doesn't have to be a museum where we have versions of these games playable for people to see. Like, at what point is it just like, open your fucking video game, heckin' video game textbook to page 21. We're going to be reading about Final Fantasy 14, A Realm Reborn. Because,
Sure.
like, I almost struggle to see a reason why, with how many video games there are today, even some AAA ones, it's like, do we need to have this preserved in a playable capacity, or could we just write it down and pass that on as knowledge?
Which
Sure, but I mean that would still be preserving it, though it would be preserving it in a very different format, but it's still preserving it.
That's fair.
Well,
So,
I mean,
so the
Moriarty.
question-
I guess I understand your point better now then, because it's like, why? At what point do we give a shit about the teddy bear hug party on Switch for $1?
Like the literal
Correct.
entire drop something. The literal entire digitized preserving of every facet of whatever teddy bear hug party. It's cover art on Steam. It's Steam description. It's hardware specs. Developer input on the forums. Some people choose to think that needs to be archived for games because it's like, well, it's the record of the internal development snapshot as well, which is a topic we actually haven't touched on here much, but also the development history of Teddy Bear Hug World Party. And I feel like ideally,
Man, my favorite
everything
game, dude.
gets archived and everything gets preserved, but ideal isn't very realistic, especially when limited people have limited bandwidth to make things. And unfortunately, I think there do have to be casualties like Teddy Bear Hug Party 3 on Steam.
Mhm, yeah.
Because honestly, like as much as I'd love for there to be let's say an online archive where I can click in and there's Teddy Bear Hug Party 3 and I can download it and play it in my browser window and look at every possible thing I could ever want. Who's going to need to? You know?
Well, I'll even throw you another wrench in that. What about ports?
Oh,
Right.
ports.
So let's say we've got Teddy Bear Hug Party on Steam, on Switch,
On Vita.
on PlayStation 5, and it's also available on, I don't know, your phone, right? So which version is the, quote, definitive version, and how do we choose that, right? So what is the subjective determination for determining a definitive edition, and how do we choose which one we're going to preserve? Do we preserve them all? Do we preserve the background of all of them? Do we preserve the internal development builds, right? So this is the alpha build and the beta build. Do we preserve that shit? What do we do?
The
right?
ports
Like
the
all of
ports
it,
thing. The ports thing.
It's a fascinating thing because there's so much that I think really it comes down to me for cultural impact, right? There are constraints behind that, but it really comes down to cultural impact because I think that most people would agree that Half-Life 1 was a culturally impactful game, right? But I don't think a whole lot of people would argue that we really need to be saving OP4, one of the DLCs, right? Like, yeah, it is there, whatever, but do you need to keep that forever in a playable state? And do you need to donate, $100,000 to the completionist to make it happen? Do you need to, be spending 50, 60 hours of a human being's labor to do it?
The ports, the idea of ports in preservation, to me comes back to the Thesean, argument that we were talking about before, right? It's like, at what point is this faithful enough that functionally it is not different, and it, to your point, Moriarty, preserves the original, the original gameplay loop or the original feel of the game.
So my wording was very specific.
Yeah, sorry, I don't
maintaining
remember.
a game's original experience within reason.
So now, then, with that definition, a port, assuming that nothing is changed, is fine. And that's how I feel as well. I think
Are we talking about new ports? Are we talking about old school ports? Like when you tried to put a Super Nintendo game on a Game Boy Advance and it would have to be slightly trimmed down? What are we talking about here?
We're not talking about new ports. We are talking about Marlboro Reds.
I should have known.
No,
Go give me a pack of new ports.
You left yourself wide open for that. But
This is your
I
fault,
always do.
Trav.
yeah, I mean, it depends on the case, right? And I think
Well, who gets to determine which case?
Who
and
is the arbiter?
Well, and I agree with
Yes,
you
who
on
is the arbiter?
I
Just
agree with
Watchmen,
you on
Nico.
cultural significance, but
I watched
Who's
clearly,
the arbiter?
some companies just don't understand the impact of some of their works.
And they may not understand it for years. There are plenty of games, right, that come out that aren't important or aren't well received. We brought up Mother earlier. A lot of people forget that when the original Earthbound released, it was a bomb. It was a flop. It did not sell well, and nobody liked it until 2013 or whatever, when it came out on the Wii or the Wii U or whichever it was.
When JTAR 9 started playing it.
Nobody cared about it before that. The only people who cared about it were YouTubers who were making videos about it. Nobody else cared about it.
If we want to take this a step further, F-Zero, Nintendo has actively commented before, like, I don't know if it was Shigeru himself, but someone at Nintendo literally responded, like, why do you want a new F-Zero game? Go play the old ones.
Man.
Like, I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said.
That's so short-sighted. I hate that.
They also make no effort to bring the old F-Zero games back. We've only gotten, I mean, there's not a lot, to be fair, but, like, the one that people, a lot of people talked about was F-Zero GX on the GameCube, and there's no way to play that. It's never been digitally re-released, and the only version of that you can get is a secondhand copy off of eBay.
Man, that is a huge fear for me in the things that I like. And again, this goes back to my fifis versus my opinions, right? And there are a lot of things that I like that I'm afraid are just going to end like that, and we're not going to have any more of it.
I mean, they will, right?
Yeah,
they
absolutely will. I don't deal with change very well. I suppose that's another conversation for another day, but
probably.
But continue, Moriarty. Sorry.
Oh, thank you so much. So it comes down to, are all games worth preserving? And I would say no, but I feel that, just through the 15, 20 minutes that we've been talking about it here, you can see that it's a pretty complicated discussion, and there are no answers here. But this is why I wanted to wait to come to what I think is the answer for all of this, right? I have an answer for all of it, but it's also maybe the most controversial one, but I think it's the best one, and that is piracy.
Go on.
I think the answer to game preservation is piracy, right? And I think the answer to it is because you have people who are going out there and they are doing the work to digitize and make these games accessible and playable in lots of different states, right? They're working on every patch and they're doing these things. And they're making it so that you can play this game 25 years from now. And I think there's an argument to be made that piracy, or maybe pirates, are in a lot of ways keeping some of these games alive years and years and years and years later, to the point where there is still a market to sell them. So this game comes up a lot whenever we talk about this stuff, because it's kind of a golden child, but I think maybe Trav's the only one who's ever heard of it, which is a game called No One Lives Forever, right? No One Lives Forever is a game that you cannot play. You cannot play it today. It is impossible to play it. You can't play No One Lives Forever 2 either. No one knows who owns it, right? It was involved in a whole series of different deals between Activision and Interplay and Fox. Back when Fox had a game studio, they were involved in it, and they sold Fox Studio to somebody who sold this to that, to this, to that, to that. Nobody knows who owns this game anymore. So there is no way to play the game legally, and it's been unavailable for 20 years. There has been some talk about Night Dive. We talked about them earlier, making this game eventually. It's their I guess, Black Swan, Golden Goose,
Holy Grail,
Holy Grail. It's their Holy Grail
Magnum opus
to get this. Yeah, well, not Magnum, because they didn't make it. It's a Holy Grail.
Right.
They already hit
Eventually
their
they
Magnum
want this.
opus with Blood Fresh Supply.
Yeah, there you go. So they want to make this eventually, but there's nowhere to buy it, right? I would argue that the reason that there's a market today for No One Lives Forever or No One Lives Forever 2 is because that game was pirated and provided and was accessible, and people can still play it, right? And so they want to play it. It stays fresh in everybody's kind of the zeitgeist, as it were. And now, if they release it in 2, 5, 10 years, right, there will still be people who want to play it. So I think that piracy not only is the best way to preserve these things long term, but I also think that it's the best way to preserve the idea of the game in the marketplace.
So I think that goes back. So first of all, I agree with you. I don't know, and just to be clear, we said earlier that emulation is legal, but you are talking about piracy, which is illegal.
Yes, the distribution of something that say, hold on, let me say my example because it makes me feel smart, and this is about me right now.
Oh yeah,
okay,
of course.
I feel bad now.
How could I have
Let's
been
say
so
I
foolish?
took this bag of Cheetos and put them on the internet, and I gave them to you. You pulled them out of your CD tray, started snacking on these bitches. I mean, these hoes. No, these things. Let me fix my microphone real quick. Anyway, you start snacking on them, but that's not legal. You didn't buy them. You're cloning them. This is a duplicate. They are not my Cheetos. They are your Cheetos now that you did not pay for. I don't know where I was going with this.
Nico, what were you saying?
This goes back to, I think, my question earlier about the role that the initial developer / owner / company or whoever owns the property, what role should they have in the preservation of things, right? And now look, to Moriarty's point, right? Like, a lot of this stuff does not have answers, and that is exemplified by the fact that it just keeps bringing up more questions, which to me is, you know, I can't help but feel like it would make sense for companies going forward, right? We can't change the past. We can't change practices of the past, right? But what we can change are standards going forward, right? And it feels like, to me, we wouldn't need piracy as the solution if companies were better about, you know, making their games more, I don't want to say future-proof, because I feel like that has an icky...
I think it's too vague.
It's too vague, right? Like, it's too much like, oh, this exact game is going to go on forever? But we don't need that. They just, they don't do a good job of, after a while, making it so that things are still accessible and available, right? So, the Nintendo eShop, for example. You can't really get any of those games anymore. Piracy is the only way, per Moriarty's point. But who's to say that Nintendo couldn't have had just another backlog like they do with the N64 and prior games that they have with their online, the Plus subscription service or whatever, right? Like, they have, that's an archive. It very much is. And that very much preserves those games. So who's to say they can't have that for things like the Nintendo eShop, where things aren't available anymore?
Because I don't want to count on a developer to do it. It's really the thing.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah,
If
I
that's
agree.
the issue. There's too much legal red tape and incentives to try to squeeze the most profits out of the average person, to the point where you get the GTA trilogy.
Because even with your point, Nico, like, you're on to it, right? It should be you access the Nintendo Virtual Console thing on your Switch, and all the games are there, basically, right? But even with the Switch Online version, they're still only offering a fraction of what they did on, like, the Wii, for example. Like, I think it's literally hundreds of games versus maybe 800 or 200. I forget the exact numbers, but to Moriarty's point, if we leave this solely in the company's hands, over time, they will just whittle it down, like Trav said, to just give you less and less for money reasons.
And we've
right?
seen that. We've seen them do
I
this,
agree.
right? This is
Unfortunately.
the world that you want to live in, Nico, is the world we already live in, unfortunately.
No, I'm very idealistic in this, and I acknowledge that. I think for me, the world that I want to live in is some kind of a relationship between the developer and the community, and finding some kind of a point that makes sense in each given case about when the community steps in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no good answers.
No, there's not.
Is really what it comes down to. So I think we've kind of explored everything we can possibly explore right now. Nico, do you have any final thoughts on game preservation other than the ones that you just said?
I think games should be preserved that are good. Thank you.
What about you, Chris?
I don't know. I would really like there to somehow be a formal conversation by those who can impact a lot of broad change and good for this. But I don't know who those people are, and I don't think anyone really can know. But I would like there to be some beacon, some example of what should be being done. And there isn't one, and it kind of feels like there won't be one, because that's not a very monetarily incentivizing prospect.
How the heck are we going to profit off of this?
Yeah, right. So my closing thoughts are, it's kind of sad and interesting to think about this at a point. And you kind of have to take it into your own hands, maybe. And by you, I mean the community, right? To what Moriarty was saying a bit ago. It's very complicated. I think that's my closing thought. Oh.
It is. It's very complicated. This is, boy, like, we haven't even scratched even half of it, right? Like, there's so much more we could talk about here.
Yeah.
So, Trav, what about you? Do you have any final parting thoughts on what game preservation doesn't matter?
Don't be like the completionist and spend $3 million on games on the 3DS eShop.
Why not?
Just
if you have the means to do it. I mean,
download shit while it's not gonna get you prosecuted until it does. Like, fucking this Metroid Zero Mission ROM. I don't care. You're not gonna get sent to jail over it.
Trav, are you endorsing piracy?
No, I'm endorsing downloading a game.
Oh, okay. As long as we're clear.
I don't know. I don't really have any thoughts that wouldn't come off as just doomer shit. Like,
to clarify, of course, we are, for legal purposes, not encouraging you to do anything.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up as an exaggeration of how I feel about the current state of things. Much like how a person says "fucking kill me" when they're not actually wanting to be killed.
Oh, okay. Well, there are beacons of light, though. Like, I think it's easy to be negative about this, but there are some good things happening in this space. But it seems you have to seek them out sometimes. I think that
until Nintendo takes the stick out of their scrotum, we're not going to see progress on a lot of preservation in terms of just having games be accessible again.
Sure. You do need to have some sort of a leader. There is something you can do, however. It's something you can do if you're in the United States, at least, which is you can support all of the changes to the laws with regards to copyright, which are currently being changed slowly. But if we can change some of those copyright laws to allow for legal preservation through museums and organizations like that, that's a really big first step. Because right now there's a very good chance that, you know, the Strong Museum or the Video Game History Foundation could be sued into oblivion by one of these game companies, and that's not a good solution for anybody. So I think I kind of want to leave my thought with my original description, my original summary of what game preservation is, because I think after hearing us talk about it for roughly 90 minutes, maybe you'll understand why I use those very specific words, right? So game preservation is about maintaining a game's original experience within reason. I think that's the best definition that we can have right now. And again, it is evolving. It's an evolving definition. It's based on the discussions in the space, and those discussions like the ones we're having now and that people are having in our Twitch chat while we're doing this podcast, right? Like these discussions are where we're coming up with everything and where we're going to be for the next several years until there is legal definition, which may not happen ever.
Oh my God, we're live?
Well, you know what else you can do?
I thought this was all offline.
Well,
I just opened Twitch and I'm like, wait, people have been listening to us this whole time?
Well, you know what else you can do?
Now you guys know what an unwatched Travis is like, and I don't like that feeling.
Unwatched?
Well,
unwatched, not unwashed.
Man,
that made more sense when you said unwatched to me, but
yeah, that's what I thought too. Well,
I'll pour some water down on your screen and wash you. How about that?
well, you know what you can do. You can find us wherever podcasts can be found, as well as YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram at Crub Official, and of course, live on Twitch at Crub_official. You can do that.
You sure could. You can also find all of us. All of our different things will be in the various show notes. And I think with that, Chris, would you like to say goodbye?
I would. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Goodbye.
Oh, very good.
Don't forget to let us know what you think should qualify as game preservation in the comments below, because I am curious to read other perspectives on this.
Me too.
I'm not, so comment below and I won't read them.
Trav won't read it. Okay.
Trav doesn't know how to read, confirmed.
All right.
It's true. It's not because I don't want to read your opinions, it's because I don't know how.
Okay, well, that's fair. All right, well, goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.